Ray Robinson fights and the Henry Armstrong fights and the Fritzy Zivik fights. And, I mean, the shows in Madison Square Garden were terrific.
Kid Galvin and the Bolo, Sugar Ray Robinson and the Fierce Combinations, Johnny Bratton with the beautiful style he had. There were so many fighters then, and every one of them had something special.
One of the great fighters who deserves a lot of credit was Emil Griffith. He fought so many fights in the Garden, and Bo Jack before him in the other Garden, and well, it was unbelievable.
It's not the end of Garden boxing, because no matter where we go, once you're stamped and labeled, you're always going to be a Garden fighter. I will always be a Garden fighter, no matter what people say or do. If I'm with another network, a major network, I think I'll always be known as the Garden fighter.
I grew up in the Garden. Kevin Kelly grew up in the Gardens, fighting from the amateurs all the way up to the professionals. And even if we ever be anywhere else, we'll be labeled here at the Garden. This is the main place, and we're from New York.
I've done a lot of growing up here, a lot of fighting and growing up. I can remember coming here as a kid, watching great fighters, great fights, and it's sad to see that it's coming to an end. But I'm also happy to be a part of that little history, and hopefully someday, soon, hopefully, we can bring it back in.
Three young fighters with interesting reactions to the closing of MSG Boxing following tonight's card. And for some of the reasons and further reaction, we went to the president and CEO of Madison Square Garden, Bob Gutkowski, to talk about the end of MSG Boxing.
Bob, we've heard all the reasons as to why boxing is being shut down here at Madison Square Garden. What efforts were made to save boxing?
Well, I think over the course of the last couple of years, there were a lot of efforts made. I mean, ultimately, it was a fact that boxing was not a good business. From a bottom line standpoint, you got to make some hard decisions as far as that's concerned. So I think we worked very hard. I think we had some great people in Madison Square Garden, Bobby Goodman and Steve Griffith, and so many people in that department that gave their all to it. And we made every effort possible to try and turn it into a profitable situation. But we're unsuccessful, and when you're unsuccessful in business, you got to make a move off it, and that's exactly what we did.
Bob, a tradition had nothing to do with it? I mean, is a bottom line, or is it tradition? You just gave up all the tradition?
Well, I think certainly tradition comes into play when you make a decision. And we have a lot of traditions at Madison Square Garden, but I think there are a lot of traditions in a lot of businesses across the land. And when you make a hard decision like this, you have to accept the tradition part, accept that you will impact that end of it, but you've got to go on it from a business standpoint. And boxing, we have a lot of businesses at Madison Square Garden. Boxing had to be one of them, and it was one that we could not make work. And I feel bad about that. I'm very disappointed about that, but we have to go on from here. And I'm proud of what we've done over the last couple of years, proud of Bobby and his staff, and everything, every effort we tried to make at Madison Square Garden to make it work, but ultimately it didn't, and you got to move on.
Why not? Why didn't it work?
Well, I think the economics really changed for sure. To get the real good fights that would bring the people out, you couldn't compete against Atlantic City and Las Vegas, and we kind of knew that going in, so we tried to get into the promotional aspect of it. And we signed a lot of fighters, but the economics of those fights really kind of changed also. HBO changed the way they did business, and although they were very supportive of us, we couldn't really get into the mainstream there, and so promotionally that route was unsuccessful for us also. So we tried everything we could conceivably do, we tried, but didn't make it work.
Bob, we're talking about being successful in promoting the other sports. Most of those are sports of the United States. Boxing in Madison Square Garden is a worldwide entity. It seems to me like they just gave up something for nothing.
Well, I don't think that's true. This was not a cavalier decision. This was a decision that was thought about long and hard, sad in a lot of respects. We did not take it lightly. But we knew over the course of the last couple of years, if we couldn't make it successful, couldn't make it work, this was ultimately what we had to do. So as disappointed as I am in it personally, I'm still proud that we made every effort possible to make it work at the Garden and couldn't do that. And for that, I have to take responsibility.
Is there a chance it could be revived in the future?
Well, you know, we've said all along that if anybody wants to come in and rent the building, Madison Square Garden and the Paramount's available, and I would hope that would be the case. We're just out of the promotion business right now. But Bobby's going to move on, and I think he's going to be quite successful, and I think he's going to have a lot of good fighters that belong in New York City, and I think ultimately you'll see some fights here for sure. I hope so.
Thanks, Bob.
Thank you, Sam.
Thank you, Bob.
Thank you.